Okay, welcome to our shir, Parshas Shemini, Tafshin Pei Aleph, and I want to welcome everybody back from Pesach. I hope we enjoyed the Sidorim and being together with the Mishpacha. Baruch Hashem, this year we were all back together again, and the Eibers Aholfen that the Tichlashan V'Kiloseh, that the coming year will be only met with bracha and hatzlacha for everybody. I'd like to talk about something that's a little bit of a painful parsha within our parsha, and that's the Misa of Nadav V'Avihu. And the parsha tells us, if you take a look in Perek Yod, Vayichu b'nei Aaron Nadav V'Avihu, Ish Machtaso, each one takes their machta, their fire pan, Vayitnu B'em Eish, and they put on a fire, V'Yusim Love Ketaris, and then the pasuk tells us, Vayikru Lifnei Hashem Eish Zara Asher Lo Tzivesi, and then they put in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu a eish that they were not commanded. So they did something which was wrong, and it was met with a terrible einish. So Tzivaisam, Vateitze eish Lifnei Hashem, Vataychalaisam, an eish came out from Hashem and it consumed them. Vayamusu Lifnei Hashem, and they died in front of Hashem. And we know this terrible tragedy on the first day of the Akamas of Mishkan, and we know the reaction of Aaron HaKayin. Vayidom Aaron, and Aaron was able to keep quiet, and he showed us the way to deal with tragedy. But that's a different shmooze, and I'd like to talk today about what happened to Nadav Avihu and what was their Aveira. And the Chazal tell us, Rashi tells us the Torah itself tells us they brought an Ezra of Nei Hashem, so that seems pretty clear. But Rashi goes and tells us two other reasons. Rashi tells the reason that they're Mar Halach V'nei Rabbi, they were Shasu Yayin. In other Meforshim, they talk about the fact that they never got married. And there are many reasons that are given that they did wrong. And all of them seem to collectively not add up enough to what happened. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that that's a raya, that everybody keeps trying to find different faults and different aveiras, that what they did was so dakistic that it was really hard to tell they did an aveira. And that's why Rashi says, and Moshe Rabbeinu said to Aaron, "B'kroi v'yakadesh." In other words, Hashem said, we're gonna give karbonis for the base of Midrash, and he said, Moshe says, I thought it was you or me, but I see they're holier than us. And instead, Nadav Avihu were chosen to be the first karbonis in the new Mishkan. And they were in the highest of high madregas. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, even higher than you and me, Moshe Varan. So in light of that, there's a Gemara which I'd like to share with you, which is almost inexplicable, but I think teaches us a tremendous lesson. If you take a look at the Gemara is in Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph. And the Gemara tells us like this. Says the Gemara, Moshe and Aaron were going on the derech to the bottom of the Yom, by the way, if you want to take a look at it. Nadav Avihu went after them. So they're all walking together. All of Klal Yisrael is going. Moshe Rabbeinu is going, and Aaron is going, and behind them is Nadav Avihu. Armalam Nadav Lavihu. Nadav, the older brother, tells Avihu, and unbelievable, just unbelievable. A Masa Yemusa Zakenim Ha'elu. When will these two Zakenim pass away? Vanivi Ata Nanig Esador, and you and I will become the Gedolei Ador. So they're talking about. Remember who they're talking about? Nadav Avihu. They're talking about their father Aaron and Moshe Rabbeinu, and it almost sounds cold. When are these two Zakenim going to die? We can take over. If you read it in the simple sense, it's just unbelievable. So what happens? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to them, you think Hanira mi kaiver is me? You think you're going to live longer than them? Let's see who's going to bury whom. Rapapa said, that's what people say. Nefishi Gamla, there are many sabi, there are many old camels, the Te'ini, Mashke, Tehugni, that carry the hides of younger camels. The old camels carry the hides of the younger camels, because we see that they lasted longer. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at what this happened, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron were in their 80s, and they lived to 120 and 123. So they still had another 40 years to go. They were only in the middle of their life. So how old could Nadav Avihu have been? It must have been 30s, 40s, whatever age they were. And here they're talking like this. So the question we have is, how could Nadav Avihu, who are Gedolei Ador, that Rashi tells were greater, that Moshe said were greater than Moshe Aaron, how in the world could they talk like this? And what does it mean that they're all walking together? So in a Aguda convention a number of years ago, one of the outstanding young stars of the Aguda spoke by Shalosh Shudas, and he said something which was amazing. He said he went to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he was talking about the Aguda, and he said, we have young leaders, young people we're giving them real power, they're going to take over, and the young people are going to lead the Aguda, it's going to be mamish, and he was so excited by it. And he said that Reb Chaim looked at him betmiya, and Reb Chaim said, "Das is nicht die Yidische Weg." That's not the Jewish way. In the Jewish world, the Zakanim lead, the elders lead, and the young people follow. And that's because they have the wisdom, they have the zikna. As we know, there's the whole ladder in Pirkei Avos, the end of Perek Hey, right? At 20 this, 30 that, 40 bina, 50 eitzah, 60 zikna, 70, and so on. Gvura is 80. At each stage in life, you become more and more and more. You gain even somebody who's a nishta yid. You have to stand up from when he hits 70 years old because he has such life experience. So we look at Zakanim differently. We look at Zakanim as Gedolim, as something to look up to. So what's Pshat Nadav Avihu? So I think this story illustrates it. I think we have to relearn this Gemara and say Nadav Avihu really meant well. What they meant to say is, listen, someday, because it says, the Meforshim asked, why does they have to say they were walking and behind them was the Klal Yisrael? And they were saying, "Oy, we have to prepare ourselves to be the Mamala Makam. We have to get ready." And they weren't saying in a mean way, Masa Yimusakanim. They were saying, Masa Yimusakanim. We have to prepare ourselves because the Zakanim are going to die. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. And we're going to take over. So we have to be ready. And they said it to me in a positive way, but the Rabbi says, no, that's not the Yiddish Weg. You might have meant well, but you made a big mistake, and maybe inside was a little bit, as we always say in the Madrega, we learn in the Torah, we always learn that everything was dakas, everything was infinitesimal, that within them was perhaps a little bit of that, when are we taking over? And the Gemara says it very strongly. But their kavanah was a good kavanah. They wished to take over so that they could be prepared. That's what they meant to say. But somehow the Rebbeinu saw that inside was a little bit of that, when are we taking over? And that's why Papa said that so many times we find it's just the opposite. That the young people, they want to take over, they're in a rush, they want now to be in charge. It's not the Yiddish Weg, Zok Reb Chaim. The Yiddish Weg is that we respect our Zakanim. And then the young people take their turn. And someday they'll become Zakanim, they'll take over too. So we look at this Indian of Zikn and Klal Yisrael, and it's so not what the world is. Although today with a president 78 years old, and the last one was 74, maybe they woke up to it, and they realized that Zikna does have some advantages. And it's not just a youth culture, as they say, but the Torah culture is one of Zikna. And therefore, Nadav Avihu, one of the things that they did wrong is to go and say, when are we taking over? And Kadosh Baruch Hu says, let's see who buries who. And they didn't last, and Moshe Rabbeinu was still there. So I'd like to tell over two machshavas, the Indian of Zikna that we find here. And the first is that Zikna does not necessarily mean old age. As we know by Yosef HaTzadik, they called him Avrech, Avrach. He was old and he was Rach. We see by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was 18 years old, and he was able to be the Gadol Hador. He was roy for it. Nobody's going to respect him because he had too black a beard. So Hashem said, okay, fine, beards we can take care of. We can turn them white very easily. We'll turn them white overnight and you'll have a white beard. So we see that there's such a concept that Zokin, we don't look just Zokin as old man. Matter of fact, the word Zokin means beard. And a beard, a person grows at 13 years old, he already can grow a little bit of a beard. The beard starts already. Somebody who comes bar mitzvah, he's already growing a beard. So he can become taka, a person can be young. I've told over many times, That my father, all of a sudden, when he was in Bialystok in the yeshiva there, when he was 11 years old, he said people stood up for him because he was learning in yeshiva, and they had covered for it. So I was thinking that we're now just came past the first yahrzeit of the Novominsker Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the Rosh Agudas Yisrael, and the Rebbe, the yahrzeit was B'dikas Chametz night, and the Rebbe was somebody who was an amazing person who, in so many different ways, led Klal Yisrael, and in so many different ways was a Talmid Chacham. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was a Rebbe, he was an Asken, he was a leader of Klal Yisrael, he was given a Tata. He was mamish amazing person who, he was really a Kol Boy. When we talk about Kol Boy, we talk about Kol Boy. We mentioned over it last year that they showed his sefer to Rabbi Yoshev. Rabbi Yoshev says he never saw such, this 25 years ago, 50 years ago, never saw such a sefer from such a young person. So I want to mention about Shava I had about the Novominsker Rebbe that shows this concept of Avrach, that a Zokin is not necessarily years. I was a 9th grade student in the Beis Medrash Torah in the Skokie Yeshiva. And at that time, the Novominsker Rebbe was the 5th Shir Rebbe, which was a very choshev shir already in the Beis Medrash, the 5th Shir. And I never thought of it until recently that he was only 31 years old when he joined the yeshiva. I think it was in 1963 or something. He was there until 1970. So when I learned the yeshiva, he was about 34, 35 years old. And I remember we were, as Bachrim, he was Reb Perlau. He was one of the Chashim. He wasn't Novominsker Rebbe yet, obviously, but he was Reb Perlau, the 5th Shir Rebbe. And I knew him, and everybody knew him, and he was so Chashim. And I started to think just recently, because we did a video about him, so I had to think about it. So I thought that, you know who the other Rebbeim were in the yeshiva at that time? They had Gedolei Olam. They had Reb Mordechai Rogoff, the great Ateres Mordechai. At that time, it was Reb Chaim Kreisworth, Reb Mendel Kaplan, Reb Herzl Kaplan, Reb Zelig Star, and Reb Aaron Zoloveitchik. And if you Google any of them, if you take a look at any of them, they were all Iluyim and Slobodka. They grew up with Mamish, and they were all in their 60s and 70s. And they were in their 60s and 70s, he was in his 30s, and he was on a plane with all of them. So you see that Zikna is relative. Zikna can come at any age if a person makes himself a Zakin. If a person takes life seriously and applies himself to his Torah, to his Avodah, whatever it is, to his Chesed. The Ramah, incredibly, was 42 years old when he was Nifter. Hard to believe. The Arizal was in his 30s. Rav Nachman Bresler was in his 30s. People who achieved greatness, legendary greatness. Even the Moshe Shem Tov in the 60s, a little older. But so many Gedolei Yisrael were Nifter in their 30s, 40s, and they changed the world. So Zokin is a relative term. When Moshe and Aaron were already called Zakanim, they were just at the beginning, almost the beginning of their career. They just started. Just about. They had 40 years in the midbar to go. And in terms of their Askonis career, they were just beginning. And there was Zakanim. So we have to look at Zakanim, and we have to say we can become Zakanim at all ages. We don't have to wait until we're 70 or 80 or 90. A person can become Zakin at 20. If a person applies himself with seriousness to whatever it is, whether it be learning, whether it be chesed, whether it be askonis, a person can achieve zikna, and that zikna is a beautiful thing, and that zikna is something that we can all learn from and we can all aspire to be. So I'd like to conclude with one other story of a zaken, and what we can learn from a zaken, a real zaken. My father of Shalom, it's coming up to his 42nd yahrzeit. And I heard what the tchina, if you take a look in the machzarim, what they used to make the ladies machzarim in the old days, in the Yiddish machzarim, they used to have it called a frische tchina, a new tchina that you can say, a new tefillah. So I have a frische maisa from my father of Shalom, even though he was nifter 42 years ago, but this maisa happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, a young man comes to me, young man relative, in his 50s probably. And he tells me, he says, your father changed my life. I said, my father changed your life? My father was nifty. He was 83 years old. You were probably 15. How did my father change your life? How did you even have shaykhs with him? So he told me the following story. Never forget it. I go to dinner. That when he was a kid, he was 10, 12, 11 years old. So he said he didn't like to go to shul. He didn't like to go to shul. He was lazy. And his father had a hard time getting him up, getting to shul. He was lazy. He said one day he's walking in the street and he sees my father. My father at that time was probably in his 80s, and he's like you said, he was 10, 11 years old. My father used to walk with two canes. He didn't have all the walkers in those days, and so he walked with two canes bent over. He used to walk the 3 blocks of shul. Took him almost 45 minutes to walk to shul. Then walk. He walked with Mesiras Nefesh. And this young man told me, he said, when I saw that, I said to myself, if he can go to shul, when it's so hard for him to go, with such Mesiras Nefesh, who am I not to go to shul when it's so easy for me? From that day on, I never stopped going to shul. To this day, 45 years later, I am still going to shul with that memory of the Zaken who changed my life. So I learned a few lessons from this. One lesson, of course, is what we spoke about in our shir on the Ben Harasha, that we're always modeling. People are watching us, and what we do they can learn from, and Mirz Hashem, and learn to become better people. Chas v'shalom, they should learn other things from us, they should learn only good things. But we also see what a Zaken can tell us. A Zaken is a person, in the Pasha sense of Zaken, an older person, who doesn't have the capacity of a younger person. He can't jump up as easily. He can't walk as easily. He can't see as easily. He can't hear as easily. Everything kommt schwer. But you see them being meiser nefesh for Yiddishkeit. You see the Zaken who comes to shul. Remember when I was a kid, there was a man who used to sit most of the time. What are you sitting for? Come on, stand up. Okay, now we understand them. So, we understand them. But everything is Mesiras Nefesh for Zaken. Everything he does is Mesiras Nefesh, because everything comes, it's not easy. And yet you see people in their 80s, 90s, hundreds, who go to shul, who do mitzvahs, who eat the Seder, who stay up and do things which are way beyond their kaiches, because they're Avas Hashem, they're Avas HaTorah, and they're Avas Yisrael. And that's something that we can learn from. We can learn from every Zaken. And that's why the Torah says, Mipnei Seva Takum, that when a person hits 70, you stand up for him. Because that person is being meiser nefesh for everything he does. Everything he does doesn't come as easily as it does when you're younger. Things that he bound up the hill, no problem. Now you walk up the hill to shul, it's a Mesiras Nefesh. Everything comes harder, and we can learn from that. And we can learn that we can overcome it. And we can learn from our Zakenim. So when Nadav Avihu said, Masa Yemusu Zakenim Ha'elu, it's a little bit of a treifa thought at that level. We don't understand the level, of course. But saying that, the Zaken has so much to teach us. Everything the Zaken does, everything the Zaken is in Yiddishkeit is something that we can take us. And right now we're in a Kufa where the Holocaust survivors are starting to go, and there are not that many left. And even the Zakenim who grew up in America in the 1930s with Mesiras Nefesh, not that many left. Let's learn from them. Let's go to our Zakenim. Let's interview them. Let's talk to them. If we have parents or grandparents who knew previous dairas, don't someday, I'm giving you hasra now, don't wait till you say, oh yeah, I wish I had spoken to them, I wish I had learned from them, I wish I knew, I don't know what they would have said, I don't know what happened. Now's the time. Interview them, record them, learn from Zakenim. Zakenim have what to teach us. And Mirz Hashem, by learning from Zakenim, we can learn what to give over in the door to our children. We spoke in the shir about the Messiah, and the Messiah of Klal Yisrael is from the older generation to us. We are the link. We're the middle link. Let's take from our Zakenim. Let's give it over to our younger generation. And Mirz Hashem, all together, we will be able to go to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu. A good Shabbos.